We heard all during the Trump's last year in office. Well, I guess technically he didn't have a last year in office. He had a last 7 months because and not because he wasn't technically still president after the election. He just didn't care to do the presidential stuff after that. He was just worried about his own political survival and was working on the big lie, and that just took up an outsized amount of time. That's why we never got his health care plan. I mean, it's 2 weeks from now. It'll be along any minute. But one of the things that Trump claims that everybody was against, and he was the one that did it. And the only, he saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, because he cut off China. He banned China, in his own words, earlier than anybody else wanted. Thank you, Michelle, for the super chat. Appreciate that. And thanks again to Hal Vickery and others for those. That during the course of him reacting to this while he was still working on his phase one of his three-phase Chinese trade deal, I didn't check. Is the second and third phase supposed to show up 2 weeks after his healthcare plan? We'll work that out. But in the course of this, what he keeps clamoring on about is that Fauci and others didn't want to shut off travel to China. He was one of the first that did it. Well, first of all, something in the order of like 28 countries stopped travel from China, including China stopping travel out of the Hubei province where Wuhan is, before that happened. So we were in the process of that happening. Trump also announced it on a Friday, made sure it didn't take place until after the holiday weekend, giving people time to just basically evacuate into the United States. And people, if you'll recall, were jamming themselves onto planes to get out of there, or just bouncing through another country. One of the reasons why there was such a big outbreak in Italy is because Italy was one of the countries where you could catch a connecting flight into the United States through and beat the ban. So the incomplete ban, on travelers that came from China or from a specific place during a specific time, or that, quite frankly, were only people who were, weren't non-resident aliens, basically the poor Chinese people who wanted to come here. Rich Chinese businessmen coming on private jets totally could come and would go right to, where would they go? Oh yeah, agricultural centers and our meatpacking plants. But thank God there were no outbreaks from the meatpacking plants from that. And of course, ports and shipyards because of goods and services coming into the United States. And Trump's ban was a sieve, for one, and only affected just kind of the average traveler, people who wanted to come spend, safely come to America and spend what would effectively be lockdown with this disease stampeding across the globe with their loved ones in the United States, perhaps. So the idea is that Trump wanted to stop this and everybody else was against it, when the reality was everybody else was against only doing that. Trump thought, well, if we just stiff arm the poor sick people, it's just another version of a border wall. He's a nail where everything looks like a hammer. And so, if we could just create a border wall for that and a border wall for this, we'll border wall the Muslims, we'll border wall the Chinese citizens, or American citizens who've been in China. Can we put a border wall around the 64 people who are on the cruise ship off the coast of San Francisco to keep them from coming in? Everything is the same solution. The gated community doorman approach that Trump has to all problems, while not doing any of the other things, while not recommending that people start wearing masks or start limiting their interaction with people, or if they're sick, cough into their elbow and that kind of stuff. Ignoring that part. The problem that the CDC had, and the NIH and Dr. Fauci and all the others there had, was that was Trump's only solution. That's all he wanted to do. They weren't against doing that. They were against only doing that. Now, some people were arguing about the timeliness of it, when it was necessary, back and forth, and that was a fluctuating argument at the time. But it became increasingly obvious to everyone that it needed to be done, and when he was like, I banned Europe before anybody else. Well, obviously, he removed the UK from that, and a lot of people from the UK brought, different strains over the United States, and that's where we are. So he took his own sweet time. It was basically banning anybody who's not a friend, and it was all based on a specific economic class of Chinese people that he was trying to ban from the United States. Kim Jong-Un and Trump famously get along very well, right? They fell in love, as Trump says. They wrote very sweet letters to each other. And why would that be? Well, according to this article in the Daily Beast, which is, I think they're quoting an article by a South Korean paper written in part by a journalist who managed to smuggle a cell phone into North Korea. And that person in North Korea calls them on it, which is a very, that is a, the danger involved in that simple act cannot be overstated. In this little section where they're talking about his younger sister, who's taken on this kind of Machiavellian position in the organization, as he has, by the way, started to remove rank from military leaders, basically demoting them based on the fact that starvation is reaching an epic level in North Korea. The people are starting to notice he's lost weight, and a lot of people are saying he's doing this almost as a PR move, so it looks like I'm starving right along with you, when he is absolutely not. He's losing the weight because being that overweight is bad for your health, and I'm sure his physicians have advised him to lose some of the weight if he wants to live. He's got enough problems just being the head of North Korea without adding, cardiovascular issues to it. The article was saying that that Kim Jong-Un bears full responsibility. I'll read back to this. When he's talking about David Straub, who's a former U.S. diplomat in Seoul, says, "I doubt that anyone outside the inner circle in Pyongyang knows the role his sister plays. But since the dynasty is so important and she appears to be close personally to Kim Jong-un, I assume she's quite powerful, but only by extension and her own apparent ruthlessness. Big Brother, meanwhile, bears full responsibility for this gratuitous measure of shutting down the North's borders," said Straub. Did he do so because he is arbitrary and anti-scientific? Straub asked, or was it somehow part of an effort to impose greater control over the party and the people? They are very worried about the COVID situation. Victor Cha, the Georgetown professor in charge of Korean issues at the influential Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, told the Daily Beast, "They're still without any vaccine support," he noted, "and feeling pressure to open some trade with China. Then, too, smuggling may have led to some transmission of the disease, hence the castigation of party officials. In the process, Kim Jong-un sees the chance to tighten his grip on power. I believe the economy is faltering in large part because Kim is trying to strengthen his control of the country by breaking the spread of capitalism, outside influence, and economic independence of the rich." By the way, he's taking his cues from Xi Jinping a lot in these. See as example the shady disappearance of Jack Ma, for example. Bruce Bennett of the Rand Corporation told the Daily Beast, "But Kim's efforts are undoubtedly destabilizing. Also interesting," he added, "is Kim's decision to blame his elites for many of the problems rather than blaming the United States, the traditional scapegoat of problems in North Korea. They're having a hard time finding a reason why we would blame, they could blame us because China is clearly the source of the transmission for them. It is also their biggest strategic partner and their biggest economic partner in terms of foodstuffs and other things when they can't produce stuff for themselves, which most of the time they can't. And distrust about transmission over their borders and his own panic about his own comorbidities as a human being and the transmission and, if he, the fact that he may or may not himself be vaccinated, it's doubtful, and that he's scared to death of getting COVID himself because of the physical position he finds himself in. And that his answer to it was a very Trumpian one. Lock the borders, shut everyone out. North Korea as a gated community. The doorman will stop this. And over the course of the last couple of months, he has demoted his highest-ranking military leader and purged a bunch of his other military leaders from their roles in direct governance because of what they call the mysterious Great Crisis, is what they call it in the article. The blame game indicates that North Korea is facing major economic and health issues because of COVID. They have done their best to hide it, but the country is in big trouble right now. Having already reshuffled positions, said Bechtel, the next big step would be an uptick in executions in order to assign blame. That makes a very awkward position for Kim Jong-un and those around him over the next little bit. And of course, makes it a bigger wild card for China in dealing with this. And China is having many of the same issues. China has a food problem. Hence the whole buying the biggest order of beef, corn, and soybeans that they did last year as part of the trade deal that they had, that Trump got into, wherein, by the way, they only bought a third of what they wanted to buy, what they said they were going to purchase. And interestingly enough, of course, Americans were in food lines last year, and some continue to be because of COVID. And yet, Trump was selling the largest order of beef, corn, and soybeans to the country that he says, at this point, intentionally attacked us with a bioweapon. Consider that for a moment, if you will. Consider, if you will, the idea that it was accidental, which is the most reasonable Occam's razor, excuse for why the disease came from Wuhan, spread to the rest of the world, including the United States, and how it paints a picture of Trump as inept and ineffective. We have to take a break, but inept and ineffective as a leader, just dealing with the accidental spread. And then add on top of that now the narrative that Trump is pushing, that it was an intentional attack, that they did this to us on purpose, which would paint the picture that Donald Trump was president during the greatest bioweapon attack in America's history, and his response was to sell them the largest order of pork, beef, corn, and soybeans in the nation's history. Chamberlain must be rolling in his grave right now. We'll be back right after this.